Welcome to Gen 365 podcast. This is an initiative of Beyond the Veil Mission. And this is a podcast for the community to empower a generation of healing and hope 365 days of the year. Before we begin, I want to remind you the meaning of humanity or Ubuntu. I am because you are. I am because we are. Therefore, to create a safe and brave space for all of us, we must remember that my healing is as good as my community healing. This is a podcast for everyone who loves the community. If you are listening to this new episode, I want you to remember that we see you and you matter. Welcome. Yes, hello, Bedette. Bedette, thank you so much. Bedette Ngabonzinza. I am so honored to host you today on the Gen 365 podcast. This is a podcast for the community. This is a podcast for the community. Gen 365 stands for encouraging and growing a community of hope, a generation of hope. We see every single day we witness lots of cares, lots of, wars, negativity, so many things fighting for the justice, racism, so many things. And Gen 365, while we encourage our community to keep fighting for the equal right for everyone, and at the same time, we want to grow a community of hope, a community that knows that despite everything we're going through, there's always hope. And we can learn from each other on ways that we can be hopeful for the future. So, Bedette Ngabonzinza, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you today. I'm doing well, thank you. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you so much. This is one of the podcasts that is going to be so fun because I see you as someone that I learn a lot from you. As a future therapist, you really inspire me a lot. I really take notes, learn from you. Really, I would say that I see you as one of my online mentors. So that's really beautiful to have you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so yes, this is Lydia, and let's start have conversation. These questions really, we put them together thinking about our audience, what they can really ask you if they get an opportunity to ask you questions, and even looking into different conversations that you keep having with our community, with your social media platform. And I'm going to start with this question. We want to know, who is Bedette in your professional settings, and who is Bedette outside of your work? We want to really get to know you in both areas.
Thank you. Let me start by saying that Bedette in her professional setting is, although is not something I stand by, we can get into that later, but Bedette in a professional setting is highly driven by her title as a board-certified psychiatric and mental health NP, so who is licensed to evaluate and treat all the mental health related illnesses, including also addiction, using psychotherapy or psychopharmacology, and also the professional title Bedette has is a workplace violence prevention program director. So Bedette at work is more very, very professional in terms of how she dresses, very professional in terms of how she relates to her colleague, professional and kind at the same time, and keeping in mind that everyone as a team, in order for the work to go well, she has to definitely, collaborate kindly with everyone, and is a person who is very much go by the book in terms of what she does at work, and also how she carries herself professionally. We'll answer this question this way because I know that Bedette at work, in a work setting, is different. Is different from Bedette outside work. So leading to me sharing who I am outside work is more like someone who wants to be fun, wants to be an athlete, wants to be
Absolutely
relatable to all generation, the young and the old and the middle, and someone who likes fashion, likes to kind of change up her hair and those things, and at the same time sharing herself and thriving to be kind and humble, a good friend, and so, vulnerable, which is not, very much expressed at work, who could cry with her friend, but never do that at work. So I think that's how I can answer this question.
Thank you so much. And honestly, if you want to witness that, go to Instagram, tap in search at Bedette Mental Health. She's both fun, she's both, professional, and you really do well everything that you do. I'm always like, oh my God, she's a mom. She works and lead people and help people, and you are always fantastic in everything that you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and ask you another question. When we invited you, we wanted to focus more delivering mental health services, because when I see you in your area of advocating for the community, sharing information, really the main core message there is like, how can we share as much as information to the community so that people can know, if I need help, I know where to look for. That's why we really selected you for this specific topic. And we are so glad that you offered, to have a conversation with us in two parts. And the first one is going to focus on delivering cultural competent mental health services. Why? Because in the work of healing trauma, honestly speaking, if we forget the aspect of involving, the understanding our cultural differences, background, really, we cannot know how to help different communities. And I am so happy in ways that you relate to the community. I'm going to ask you, Bedette, in a simple way. Think about talking to my boys or your children. Tell me, what is trauma? Because we see these words, this word on social media a lot these days. A simple tweet, oh my goodness, I'm traumatized. Everything is trauma. I need to know, does anyone exposed to traumatic events become traumatized? What is trauma really?
Thank you. This is an excellent question. As you say, this is a word we often see used a lot, but I'm going to try to answer it in the most simplified way. If I was talking to my, children or your children or any other person who like things this way better, the way I respond to it, I would first say trauma is not what you go through. Trauma is how you get out of it.
Wow.
So trauma is me walking down the street barefoot and my toe kind of ran into a rock and my toe is wounded and it's bleeding and it has this wound that it needs to be taken care of, and based on how it's taken care of, that's how it will heal faster, and that's how the scar will look like. Mm-hmm. That's trauma of the wound I just came out of, that I just endured with running into this rock, walking barefoot. But someone else, or on a different time, might run into the same rock, mm-hmm. and then, it hurts, mm-hmm. but there is no wound, no bleeding. Mm-hmm. So that person did not come out with trauma. Yes. But the person who came out, who have this open wound bleeding, this person has trauma. Yeah. Even when we bring back to how we define it, at work, we say, if we're going to see if someone has trauma, we're going to see, yes, we can ask what a person has experienced. And it's about you experiencing it directly, going through it directly, or it could be about hearing about a very close friend or a family member going through something traumatic, you might come out with that bleeding wound that I explained. So you will have trauma if you come out with that bleeding wound by experiencing something traumatic, seeing something traumatic, or hearing about a very close friend or a family member. And trauma, we look at trauma, how it looks for us is the symptoms you are having. They could be in 4 categories. There is what we call avoidance symptoms. Mainly, it's really what the word say, avoidance symptoms. You try to stay away from anything that could remind you of that rock. Barefoot might be triggering, and seeing that road where you experienced that wound might be triggering. So you try to avoid going to that route. You try to avoid going barefoot, and you try to avoid just rocks. So another category of symptoms is what we call negative alteration in moods. And that's pretty much similar to what we call depression, sadness, guilt, shame, negative view of yourself, and, just anything that could be, depressing, in that category. And there are also another category we call intrusion symptoms. Intrusion symptoms is these thoughts that you didn't really call, just automatically getting into your mind. It could be just you finding yourself dreaming about the rocks, and then just something could be triggering, or out of nowhere you start really worrying about what it's like to be barefoot. Those thoughts that are so disturbing that you don't have much control over. Those symptoms that you were experiencing. Something else also is alteration in arousal and reactivity. That's where we can see someone with some irritability, difficulty, containing themselves when something is a reminder. That's what people refer to as someone being angry, like what we can call anger or irritability. Yes, this wound or these symptoms that we see. That's how I can best define trauma.
Wow. I really like the first part you said. Trauma is not what you go through, but it's how you what was the last part that you used?
It's how you get out of it.
It's how you get out of it. Are you
bleeding versus it was just this impact that did hurt, but there is no open wound.
Awesome. That was a really, really a great explanation. And the simple question again, does everyone who's exposed to traumatic event become traumatized?
So that answer is simplified by saying the same thing we just said. Not everyone who ran into a rock will sustain like an injury, like an open wound. You can go through a traumatic experience, come out of it without being traumatized. People are different, and it doesn't mean a person who has this symptom is weak. It has nothing. The study have shown that it has nothing to do with before, back in the days, especially because, I work with military. It used to be seen as a weakness to have these symptoms. So you can go through similar experience to people and you get out of it differently. So that's how I can answer that. Not everyone who goes through traumatic experience get trauma.
Yes, and I like that you mentioned that those symptoms are not a weakness. And I can add to that in a way that when our body is able to feel and experience, whatever emotions that comes our way, that means you are healthy. If you are scared and you get scared, that means, that's natural emotions. If you get wounded and you feel it, you're scared, and you try to avoid to never feel that again, that's natural. So let us really normalize, those type of symptoms, so people can know that if I have ever experienced any type of trauma, it's okay to really feel, or experience these symptoms, because, that's the result of whatever I went through. So I'm going to ask you this question, might be a little bit similar to what I asked you before. If you can help us to understand, especially different type of trauma with the focus on PTSD, complex PTSD, or complex trauma. I really chose that specifically because when we speak about trauma and PTSD, there is a really great understanding that PTSD really is a result of all those symptoms we can really experience after experience a traumatic event. And I think you highlighting on this area can help people who have experienced a trauma to know that just because I've experienced trauma, and it's important to understand that I don't specifically fall into this category, because I feel like everyone on social media using I was traumatized. It that dismiss really the conversation to help people who really live with the symptoms every single day or often that comes with either PTSD or complex PTSD, just because this word is overused these days.
Another great question that can easily be led by what we have been saying is not what you go through, is how you get out of it. Mm-hmm. So there are different types of trauma. In the medical term, post-traumatic stress disorder, often referred to as PTSD. Mm-hmm. So PTSD is if you have those symptoms in 4 categories that we talked about. You have to have a certain numbers in order to say, okay, you have a diagnosis called post-traumatic stress disorder. Although often I also see this, we are not hang up so much on how many symptoms you have. Even if it's 1 or 2, if it's interfering with who you are, your ability to function at home or at work or in the community, it's already enough to be addressed. Mm-hmm. So, but the post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a term used to just as a leading in the medical community, where we can find like a treatment plan. It's an evidence-based work on how to address this, how to work on that. But I don't want this to be a reason to possibly minimize someone who might have 1 or 2 symptoms that just because they don't meet criteria of the diagnosis, it means it's somehow not valid or not trauma related. Again, it's how you get out of it, it's not what you go through. So like I explained, post-traumatic stress disorder have symptoms in those categories. There is what we call acute PTSD. It's usually symptoms you might have right after the event. So you just had a car accident, you having all these symptoms, you're having nightmares about it, you're having some sadness, or you're having irritability or anger. You find yourself in the first month or so having these symptoms. But if you address it right away, you're talking about it, you seek treatment if you have to. Trauma is all about how you speak it, is how you, trauma does disrupt you. It's a split between who you normally are when you are balanced, or it's just this change biologically, is this change of how the brain normally responds to situation that is fearful. So usually when there is disconnect, disrupt, even in a situation that are not fearful, you might find yourself with these symptoms. So if acute is early on, you might have this symptom, but if they are addressed right away, you might start the journey of healing. It might just lead to that scarring quickly. Remember, you might run into a rock, you have a wound, but if you go home, you take care of it, you address it right away, in 2 days, you might see a little scar. Even the scar might eventually go away. But if you leave it open, nothing about it, it just, start coming out of it. That's where we might run into chronic post-traumatic stress disorder. Chronic could be based on acute PTSD that was never addressed right away and turn into a chronic, or it could be just going through a series like domestic abuse or one trauma after another, different way of, find yourself not healed to begin with. It leads to chronic conditions after it's been past 1 month. It's PTSD.
And that would be complex trauma?
And then for complex trauma, it's another layer added to chronic trauma, where we see a lot of, interfere with the ability of the person to interact with other. It just interfere with your ability to function as who you are created to be. There could be some interpersonal issues, like the ability to maintain friendship or to maintain like a household, and to maintain just it does interfere with your ability to interact with others, because others might not understand. You might not even understand what you're going through. You know, you might go to an interview and they might say something triggering and you walk out of the room. And right after I do that, you even start wondering, what did I just do, right? The way you're relating to things that could be triggering, you're responding might be really something that is not helping you in the community. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, to relate to others. And also you might have a lot of thoughts and a lot of, emotions, like we are often using irritability or anger or mood swings that might just show outside, that really it's affecting who you are. It's affecting with your ability to function every day. That's when we start saying this is a complex trauma, because it's definitely affecting this person and how they can navigate the world.
Yes, thank you, Bedette, for highlighting the importance of not dismissing anyone, regardless of what type of trauma you have experienced. Yes. And I think, you know, that comes also with a message to encourage our community in a way that, you know, not every single event you go through means you have experienced trauma. And I like that you said that it's not what you go through. Because, you know, we see often somebody say this, oh my God, that's trauma. Somebody did this, oh my God. So the thing is, you know, it's like, you know, as we grow as a community, there is a need to support each other, and also calling out, you know, each other, supporting each other in a way, you know, let's just not minimize this word, because really the trauma impact it's something that really impact many people worldwide, and we have to be careful in a way. And also, I am so happy that many people can freely, you know, open up in a way. I feel like, you know, I feel this way, and it's okay. It's okay as well, so people can be able to help you and guide you. And yeah, thank you. And I want to ask you this question that I share with many trauma survivors. You know, sometimes, you know, what I see in our Afro-Black community, especially, I see that we experience so much. And the minute we start healing from something, then there is another crisis, then there is another event. It's like it never stops. And, you know, even creating this space, I love one of the person who helped us to build this podcast. When she was working on one of our projects, I used to mention, like, you know, we need safety space for our communities. And she was like, no, we need breathing space first. And the minute we start breathing, it's like there is something else. And people have experienced lots of trauma, like myself. This question keeps coming. Is healing from trauma possible? And I want to ask you this question, and I want you either to, as you respond to me, you are responding to our big community of survivors, and we want to hear what are your thoughts on this question.
Thank you. This is an excellent question, and that can be simplified by this. Yes, healing from trauma is possible. I'm coming back to your first question that asked to explain what trauma is. Mm-hmm. Trauma is you running into a rock barefoot and you're coming out with an open wound that is bleeding. So if that wound is taken care of and really well bandaged, kept away from bacteria, it will heal quickly. It might leave you with a scar that might just affect the tissue and the ability for that tissue to feel some things, but it can heal. It just simply needs to be taken care of. So yes, healing from trauma is possible, but that journey, that work has to happen. And just because the healing is starting or it's possible doesn't mean necessarily we're looking for cure. Like the scar will always be there. You might have some moments where the scar, depending on the level of the scar, some might be raised. We call this some certain keloids, or sometimes the scar might hurt a little bit, right? So it's possible, yes, to heal from trauma.
Then I'm gonna ask you something, okay? Now yes. we are talking. I'm talking on behalf of the trauma survivors, right? No, I just want to make it clear. I cannot represent you in a way that I understand whatever you went through, but I am asking questions that I feel like, I have heard from many people, many trauma survivors, because when you use the word healing is possible, but then there is a scar that can hurt time to time. For me, I'm like, that's not healing. And, I'm like, if I'm healed from something, but I know that this might hurt time to time, that's not going to take away my fear that I will never get healed. And for me, this is for me, I decided to use the word, I can be restored from trauma. Whatever I experience will stay here. But as I walk through it, it will become less heavier on me. Then it does not really control me. Whatever I went through does not control me anymore. That's where we get those coping mechanisms, either from therapy, from any type of treatment that we receive. But I really have a conflict to use the word that trauma healing is possible. And don't get me wrong, that's why you're here. We need to hear from you in a ways that, yeah.
I think you just explained beautifully what I was trying to say, but referring to it as healing.
Yes.
And I think for me, I'm not saying healing is not cure. Cure completely vanished, gone, never happened, right? Because you could be cured without being healed, right? But we are talking about a situation during which you are able to function, a situation during which you have found a way to really, start processing this, a situation where, exactly what you just said, how you explained it, it's what I was referring to when you use the word healing. I know certain words could be triggering. And so another word I'm thinking about right now is the word forgiveness. Forgiveness, I always feel like I wish we had many words trying to explain that concept. So I can appreciate how the idea of simplifying this healing is possible, because people will understand it differently. Because someone might say, I thought I healed from this. How come I'm crying? How come it feels like, it's happening right now? But let me say, someone who has started a journey of healing, the way it's going to hurt when there is triggering or digressing is not the same as someone who never been there. Because you could go through something very traumatic in a young age, as a child or as a young adult. It's never addressed. You have to be busy doing what you need to do. You forget about it. It's not accessible. You place it in avoidance symptoms somewhere in your brain. You don't want to go there. But because it was never addressed, later on in your adulthood, something triggers it. And it feels like it's happening at the moment. It feels like it's during that time where you were, fearful, where it hurts because it was never addressed. It was kept somewhere. But if this is something that was addressed, like you just say, you're learning coping skills, you're talking about it, you're realizing that, yes, I'm not the person I was before, but I know I can navigate with this new person after going through this. It's not going to feel the same way. Yes, it's going to always be there. You will always remember your traumatic experiences, but the impact they have on you, the pain that is there, is not the same. Yes, that's what I wanted to touch on.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think, healing work, healing trauma is us having the ability to address what we went through.
Absolutely.
And as we address it, our body learns to release it. Our body learns to release the trauma. And, if you're lucky enough and we get, to know what type of coping mechanism we can use really to cope with whatever symptoms or whatever, anything that might trigger our trauma in the future, that can help us even in the future if anything comes. And I agree with that. I think, the trauma healing work, the beauty part of it is having a self-awareness. And I can testify to that. The things that used to trigger me in the past, but right now, and I will stay there forever. But right now, yes, they still trigger me, but 31 minutes, I'm able to recognize, remember, this is why this is happening. But without that understanding, you stay there. Thank you so much.
That's healing.
I'm going to ask you, thank you. I love that. I'm going to ask you, how would you define cultural competence in mental health, and how is that important to mental health practitioners?
Cultural competency is very, very important because that means you are able to speak the language of the person you're going to be working with during this journey of, healing, of you as, a therapist or as a psychiatrist or a psych NP. So it's very important to have cultural competency because you will be able to speak the language. Believe it or not, not having a cultural competency is like working with someone and you speak a completely different language. Can you imagine if that's not possible, right? If you speak French and I speak English, we cannot really communicate in a way that I can work with you towards your journey of healing or my purpose of me being there. It won't work. So cultural competency is very, very, very important. I can think of an example. I might not be able to specify it, but I'm going to try. The way a person from like westernized, I don't want to say developed because I think Africa is also constantly developing. So the way a person is expressing themselves in the United States or in Canada when they talk about sexual trauma, completely different from how a person would express that in Rwanda, for example, or Burundi, or any other African countries. Because, the way this person might be saying it might not be as explicit, might just dropping the hint here and there. So if you don't have that cultural competency to understand that, if they are able to say this, that this happened, this is probably what they meant. You won't be able to get anywhere if you don't have cultural competency. And it's very possible to do that because if you can take classes if you have to, or you can just, if you're lucky enough to have experienced that culture, to be from that culture, to be, that's good. But also, I still think it's also very important because things are changing to constantly be trying to be competent. So it's very important to be competent. Do I think it's the ultimate, that's the only way you could be helping? Well, it depends on how a person, how they are willing to really get into it. So back to answer your question without really going outside the question, it's very important.
Yeah, I think, honestly speaking, in this era, I think any mental health practitioners have to be aware, have to have some sort of training to even recognize that this client that I have right now, I might refer this client to another person that might be able to help them better. Because I think, we live, the world is open now. Even thinking about the Western culture, North American culture, we have people from different communities. Let's see, even if you are a psychiatric or you get to treat different patients from different cultures. And I think I have one of my professors who called the DSM-5 the Bible of and I don't think those just symptoms in the DSM-5s are enough to help you understand someone. I think it's important not to only look at the symptoms are so important, but understanding the event that led to those symptoms, you can have a good at least a basic understanding of how to understand different backgrounds in ways they express themselves. Because I can be coming to talk to a practitioner as a client and I say something and it might be expressed in another culture in a different way. For example, I think there is this podcast of Nigerian women who used to say how their parents express love in a way that when you hear it in the North American culture, you're going to be like, oh, that's mean. That's no love. For example, your mom is instead of apologizing, she makes you a plate of food. For her, that's I'm sorry. I'm making you food, but I'm not going to say that I'm sorry, but I'm sorry. So I think and one thing before we continue, I can even tell to the audience, that's something that helped me because I remember when I got to Canada having the opportunity to go to counseling, I went to at least 2 counselors and I would just sit and say nothing. I was and I could relate to many people who says that, therapy doesn't help. But once I understood that it's important to look at your therapist credentials and see, what they're capable of, what their skills, and help you to understand, does my therapist really understand, let's see, the Black community? Maybe they understand, what it means to be, let's see, a Black woman or an African woman. Does my therapist have an understanding of maybe, of event of any type of genocide? So it's important to really look into your therapist if you have that option, because that's also a privilege. Sometimes it's like, this is what you get. Can you accept or not? But if you have different options, make sure you read about your therapist. Be like, do they have really the competency to work with different communities? It might not be all the communities, but they have cultural competence in mental health. So I'm going to continue, I think the next, sorry?
I just wanted to say something to this, because this is definitely a conversation that can be expanded for a much longer time. But what I wanted to touch on that is, I don't think, especially given the shortage, I don't think it's very important. Any treatment relationship is very important when both parties are involved. The patient and the therapist are heavily involved into really actively participating and really wanting to do this work. People will be hearing this conversation. I don't want them for this to be the ultimate a deal breaker. Like, if someone doesn't look like me or hasn't experienced what I have experienced, it automatically means more than likely they're not going to be able to help me. I don't think it's what we are saying, but it might be interpreted that way. So it's much better if it's possible, but a person might be empathetic enough that you can even teach the person will be willing to learn. Because sometimes when we tend to stay there, we might limit ourselves. Sometimes myself, I might even like a therapist who doesn't look like me, because I'm going to learn something that I've never get a chance to learn. I mean, my therapist is, doesn't look like me, grew up in this country, but I think she did a great job. And me, I was often kind of teaching her, this is what happened, maybe go read this. Yes, in a perfect situation, very good to have a professional who's culturally competent, but it should not be a deal breaker. It all has to do with...
This is something I want us to touch, to spend more time on it. Let me tell you why. Because there is a stereotype or a myth that, for example, Black people or African people refuse therapy. And I remember we're in the conference a few weeks ago, and I said, no, that's not true. Afro-Black community, we don't refuse therapy, but there are less services that offer, appropriate services to our community. When I say that, it does not mean about the skin color. My therapist for almost 2 years was from the Asian community. But she had a good background, strong background in, working with different community. And she was aware. When I said that, it's not about who looks like you, although that matters as well. I remember there was this case study where they really offered free therapy to this Mexican community, and what they saw that was that the community refused to go. So all the therapy was free, and every time they entered the building, at the reception there was a white person. And in the building, it was maybe 80% white people. And people felt like, this is not my place. So while it's not really, the skin color might not be important, however, that representation is so important as well. But at the same time, cultural competency, in mental health services goes beyond the skin. It's like, having that training in understanding different cultures and know your limitation. For example, if really I'm speaking to someone from, let's see, a different background, and I'm from this background, it's recognizing that when you have that training, that skills, it helps you to know what type of the questions that I can address that might not be offensive, and what type of the service that I can offer to this person and be recognized when to step out when I can. So I am telling you the reason why I'm going to give you another example. At Beyond the Veil, once we had a grant to offer free therapy services to our community. And we had 3 therapists, 2 from the Rwandan community, 1 from non-Rwandan community, but he has a strong background with working with the Rwandan community. He has great skills. And most of the people will go to that person. So although one thing, it was more of, the issue of confidentiality, this person may know someone that I know, so it's not okay with me. But the other person was not Rwandan, was not Black, but he was someone, and trust me, the feedback we got, everybody was highly satisfied. So when I say this is because there is always these stereotypes, even when we do this live conversation, people don't like to receive mental health services. But at the same time, people go to these services. The minute they start talking, they feel like, maybe those services are not understanding or helping them. I don't know.
Very good point you just made, very well explained. And I added that comment because more often than not, my person work in my office say, have you served in the military? No. Okay. I want someone who has served. Later on, when they realize that there are certain things I do when it comes to addiction, that, only a limited member of provider are able to write certain medication in that area. When they might find themselves having to see me regardless, and then eventually they learn, oh, wait a minute, I can connect with you in a way that I think is helpful. Many people will say, I want a woman, or I want someone who looks like me from the get-go. So that message was really targeting someone who might just have this idea right away without even just exploring how competent is this person, how culturally competent is this person. So it's very important what you say, and it's very important to be culturally competent, but let's not just, especially for people who might be looking into services, just what you see at first might not necessarily be a reflection of a therapist who's going to be able to help you or not.
Yeah, I love that because, the goal is not that you look like these people or you have gone through what they went through. I like this definition more. It says that cultural competency in mental health is, as a provider, we are able to interact effectively with people of different cultures by incorporating the unique beliefs, behaviors, and needs into the diagnosis and treatment plan. So I really love it the most. So you are right. When you hear this conversation, don't get confused that we are discriminating this part, because you are so right. We have, there is a need for more, mental health practitioners. However, it's important that they are really, even if you are not and you're not trained in that area, I encourage you to do so, because, the focus here is in trying to really serve your client or someone that comes your way in understanding, incorporating, their unique beliefs, behaviors, in the treatment plan you're offering them. Thank you so much, Bedette. And I think this brings us to the last question, because I think the next question really we responded to it in direct way. So I think I'm gonna ask just an intimate, personal question. I'm gonna ask you, if you could go back in time, what is one thing that you can ask your younger self? And yeah, let's just answer that question first. If you can go back in time, tell me one thing that you can ask your younger self.
This is a very good question. And I think what I would ask my younger self to give me is the innocence, is the naivete, is the just blind eye to the cruelty, to the passive aggression. It's just, I would like to get that back, because I think I maintained this the longest, and I would like to just get more, this just innocence, this belief that everyone is just wonderful with just, purpose to make the world a better place. And as I grew, I did learn that we are all different, and there's certain things that, in this world are not necessarily nice. So that's what I will ask my younger self. I
really, really love that, and I'm going to ask you another question. If there is one thing that you can give to your younger self, what could that be?
I will give my younger self, it's going to be a bit silly, just like I mentioned earlier when you were asking Bernadette outside, I like to do different things and, a bit silly again. I will tell my younger self, please don't do braids after another. It's going to damage your hair roots.
Oh. Oh. Wow.
I'll give myself a hair free of braids, of micro braids.
Oh, wow. You know what? That's the part of healing even the Black girls in us, because, growing up, using everything for our hair, to have the straight hair, to have the hair that
like, I'll be like, girl,
beautiful woman. And I'm loving this generation because we are claiming our beauty. Who we are, our skin, and I'm glad that you have two daughters. You are really nurturing them and raising them in a way that they're gonna appreciate. Even myself, I'm restoring my natural hair. It's growing, and that's really nice. I am so happy, and I see different. I have one of my the chair board of Beyond the Veil. They have this organization called Black Esteem. And they really incorporate all different areas in science, mathematics, entrepreneurship, everything. And I like how they use natural things to help young girls to know and learn about themselves. And one thing they do is even learning math through braiding our hair, through taking care of their hair. They have different awesome event. If you have young girls, follow them on social media, Black Esteem. And I think our conversation is coming to the end. I really said that at the beginning this was going to be a sister conversation, and we had a really good conversation. And this conversation, if you have questions, really send us a message on our platform. Especially this, as we had this conversation about cultural competence in mental health, I think it's something we need to address more, because more I approach different communities, especially the Afro communities, the Afro-Black community, I see that it's the piece that is missing, but our community members don't know how to address that. They're like, services is there, but I don't feel like, they're understanding how to help me. And that's why I brought it up. And thank you so much for speaking on this and sharing wisdom and insight. And again, what she said, when you receive service, don't start looking at the skin. Don't start, thinking, oh my God, who is helping me? Know that somebody might look differently than you, but looking even into they can have great skills to help you. And if you feel like you're not comfortable, don't understand it, you can always reach out to us or anyone that you can trust, especially in the professional areas in mental health, and we can always give you an advice. Or sometimes we even need that question to us. Sometimes there are people that I tell, they're like, I want to go to therapy, but I don't know what to address. I don't know what to ask. I don't know whatever. Sometimes we can really give you those advices in ways that you can receive the appropriate help that you need. Bedette, do you have any last word before we conclude this episode?
No, you summarized it very well. I enjoyed this conversation, and thank you for having me, and can't wait for more.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I wish you a beautiful time, and say hi to your family.
Thank you.
That's it for the week. We hope you gathered your dose of resilience for the week ahead. Follow Gen 365 podcast to know when the next episode comes up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, or Google Podcasts. Share with your friends, community, and family, and do not also forget to follow and share feedback or questions on our community organization social media at Beyond the Veil Mission on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Or learn more about our work via our website at www.beyondtheveilmission.com. In the spirit of building resourceful, stronger communities, we can also help your community or business or organization to share your news and event on our podcast. please email us for collaboration at podcastgen365@gmail.com. Thank you. Bye.